Hitch up the wagons and polish your spurs because it's high noon and the searchers are looking for a way into your network. October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and Infosec is helping to tame the wild, wild net with our collection of free training resources that will make your employees the masters of the cyber frontier and bring cybersecurity to the forefront of your organization. Go to infosecinstitute.com/NCSAM2020 to download our free toolkit containing a stagecoach full of provisions to run month-long security awareness campaign, including posters, infographics, newsletters, email templates, presentations, and more. Grab Cybersecurity Awareness Month by the horns with this wild bunch of free material from our award-winning LX Labs team. Just as the wanted posters in the Wild West help the public recognize the region's most notorious villains, our free training kit reveals the identities of common cyber threats to help prepare your employees for the real attacks they face. Again, go to infosecinstitute.com/NCSAM2020 or click the link in the description to get your free collection of training materials and help spread security awareness. And now, let's begin the show, partner. Welcome to this week's episode of the Cyberwork with Infosec podcast. Each week, I sit down with a different industry thought leader, and we discuss the latest cybersecurity trends, how those trends are affecting the work of Infosec professionals, while offering tips for those trying to break in or move up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. Our guest today is Mahmoud Abdelkader, the CEO and co-founder of Very Good Security, or VGS. He was previously CTO and co-founder of Balanced Payments, exited Stripe. Prior to that, Mahmoud designed automated product matching systems at Milo.com, acquired by eBay, and built high-frequency trading systems for Wachovia Securities, now a part of Wells Fargo. With experience ranging from Wall Street to early-stage startups, Mahmoud is passionate about democratizing data security. He started Very Good Security to make best-in-class security and compliance attainable for businesses of all size. So for our show today, we're going to talk about the problem of sensitive data and the possibility of solving the problem of sensitive data by removing sensitive data from the equation altogether. Mahmoud, welcome, and thanks for joining us on Cyberwork today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about your background here, so let's just kind of open up about that. Like, what first got you interested in things like cybersecurity, and was the computers and tech always sort of part of your background?
I think I think I was always just fascinated, obviously, with computers when I was younger. But really, I started my computing background by reverse engineering games.
Oh wow!
Like Age of Empires. I was actually one of the first few to build the no fog hack for Age of Empires.
Okay.
It was one of those things where I just wanted to be able to get an unfair advantage, and that ultimately led me to reverse engineering, which then let me understand how to work with computers, how computers work, what is the underlying technology that's driving it beneath the scenes there, and that's kind of like what really kicked off my career in computers.
Okay, and where did it go from there? Did you study it in college and everything?
Yeah, actually, so surprisingly, I was fascinated with a ton of topics. Really, I wanted to be a math and physics major, and my mom suggested after seeing me kind of like spend hours trying to build all these different tools to kind of help me reverse engineer games. She was like, why don't you go into some kind of computer engineering? And I realized that was really, my passion was I wanted to understand, how to take that to the next level. I didn't really understand what that was when I was first building and just playing around and hacking on some stuff.
It was just something fun for you at that point.
Yeah, it was just a hobby, right? And so, but I really thought like the hard sciences was where you had to go. Mm-hmm. Speaking as a first generation immigrant, as you could tell, the pressure is there. And so it was very, but then I went to college for sure. And that started to really deepen my knowledge of how computers work, how architectures work. And I would say it was not actually in software until my first job, which was right out of college, where I joined Wachovia Securities, which is now Wells Fargo Securities after the acquisition by Wells Fargo, and worked with my fascinating colleagues on Wall Street, who really, I guess, shaped me to be the engineer that I am today.
Okay, and so so walk me from there to where you are now. Like we talked about it a little bit, but like what were some of the different sort of transition points where you're like, oh, you sort of veered off in a different direction. Oh, this is interesting. I want to check this out, or I want to check this out, or oh, that's cool. I should learn this thing.
Well, ultimately, if you kind of watch if you kind of like look at my patterns, I went to infrastructure first, and then I
Okay.
went to an e-commerce site,
Yeah.
Milo.com, which is effectively combining infrastructure plus e-commerce. And then after that, I went to payments, which was ultimately how do you monetize. And then from payments, I went into, well, it looks like the whole conversation is around data security in the first place. And as you could see my evolution of my career, you know, from Milo to Balanced to then building VGS, I realized that the world was changing and our definition of security is becoming paramount and central to what we do today. So today, in order for me to provide value for customers, I have to become a data security company. And that's actually what we realized at Balanced was we had to build a shadow company inside of our actual company itself so that we can build our vision of what payments was. And so after that had an exit in 2015, we realized as well that most folks just wanted to have this undifferentiated heavy lifting gone from them so that they can focus on value. And so that's when we started realizing that security should be a business enabler, not a cost center. And ultimately became the thesis for how our product works today, and why, you know, we're very excited to be working on VGS.
Okay, so yeah, I want to talk about, we sort of walked right past this, but I want to kind of open it up a little bit more again. So in our discussion before the show, you noted that, as you said, data security systems put in place 10 plus years ago aren't keeping up with the massive amounts of data processed today, leading to increased hacks and breaches. So, you know, one of the first things I usually like to ask about is how the business has changed since you first entered. So in this case, that's an extra crucial question. So give me a then and now, as you were just discussing with, you know, some of these things, but give me a then and now on what data security systems were like back then and what they didn't implement or couldn't have known about, and what data systems and data quantities, you know, would be like today if they had implemented that.
Yeah, so I think there's a variety of factors that go into that, right? So when we were securing our systems 10 years ago, we didn't really have the connectivity or the belief that we can just call a function over the internet, right? Today with RPC, today with all these different APIs and all these smart IoT devices that we have today, data is being exchanged at rates previously never seen before, right? Every year we create more data than we've previously created for all the years before combined. And so, yeah, it's pretty unbelievable. And so ask yourself, how is it possible that the approach of translating what we did with, you know, putting security guards or having point solutions, how does that translate in the digital world where data moves at a speed where we can barely keep up? And so as a result, we just have to come at it with a different approach. There's no longer a way where I can buy and protect the perimeter, because that doesn't mean you're safe. The old age of, you know, the old age advice of, you know, being able to be in control is to minimize risk is now actually more of a liability, right? And so, and also this is compounded by the fact that when we saw Google and the way they were able to use heterogeneous computing to be able to, you know, do like MapReduce or extract value from their data, every company wanted to become a data company, obviously, as we know. And so they started acquiring all these different data, all those different data sets, and trying to extract and analyze this information. 10 years ago, that was all the rage. It still is today, but now we have these privacy laws and regulations that have been passed that are effectively causing what we previously put into our balance sheet as an asset is now mostly a liability. And the idea is, if we were to understand where were the transformational shift that happened before in the history of humanity, it's when we digitized banking. Before, you and I would be carrying cash or cowrie shells or gold bullions. And if we were, you know, if somebody held us up and took that from us, that was gone. And so by building trust infrastructure and removing the value of money from the physical possession of money itself, we're able to build the commerce foundations and the trust foundations that enable the economy today. And that's the big realization with VGS. The business has changed over the past 5 years because we're starting to understand what is the de-risking of data look like in the same manner that we've de-risked transactions and money today. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah. So where do you see standard data security practices sort of falling down the worst right now in 2020? What are some things that you think should be obvious but are being haphazardly implemented, if at all?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So I think ultimately some of the control, like basically the biggest realization and some of the most sophisticated CISOs will tell you is that compliance doesn't equal security, right? And
Hmm.
so just by checking the box doesn't mean you're secure,
Oh,
right?
sure. Yeah,
So
we
if
talk
we
about that all the time. Yeah.
right, so by inversing the operation and saying by being secure, you should be able to inherit compliance. It's a byproduct of having security posture, right? And
Yes.
so folks who just think like, let me just secure the perimeter, let me buy another firewall, let me upgrade my systems. That's not a security solution. We have
Right.
to understand the algebra that goes into why we need to secure our data in the first place. And then
Yes.
from there, realize, well, why do we even need it in the first place? The best, and this is, the best prevention is to not have anything worth stealing.
Yeah.
And so if we can if you can have the value of our data without having the actual data itself, it solves the problem that we're all trying to do. Because another bridge or a larger wall or more moat or barbed wire, that's not going to solve the problem, because
Right.
somebody else will have a more sophisticated attack on against your defenses. And as time goes on, what you have now has to be upgraded. What we need to see is we need to stop thinking of DIY, and we need to start adopting and realizing that it's just better if we become business enablers and become more of a risk management organization rather than controlling and securing ourselves. It's just ridiculous to expect every company to be able to build their own bank vault. So
Yeah.
why do we expect them to secure their data in the same way? Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. 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 So, I mean, that leaps perfectly into my next question here. So, we start with the very intriguing notion of the best way to remove the problem of sensitive data is to remove the sensitive data altogether. So, and you just mentioned that as well. So, what does that mean exactly in a practical sense, and how is that implemented? Could you sort of walk me through the technical ramifications of how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think the first thing we need to take a step back here and just understand why. Why do enterprises need the data in the first place, right? Why do they need to be able to do that? It's usually to achieve a business outcome. For example, if you went on a site and you gave your social security number, identifier, national ID,
Yep.
it's typically so that the provider on the other side would go run a credit check on it or understand what your worthiness is. And so typically, that's the reason why they have to hold the data in the first place. So we have developed really great solutions for data at rest, as well as data in motion, obviously with TLS 1.3 and all the different ideas that protect the data in motion. But really, when data is in use to extract the value is when it becomes most vulnerable, right? And so if you start to enumerate how data is actually used today, most companies use it to identify it, right, so that they can effectively do some kind of like very simple statistical analysis like group join or something where you can effectively tokenize the data that will help you do that as well. But at the same time, they also want to be able to use it and send it to other third-party providers and basically just exchange that data for value instead. And so what VGS decided to think about was, well, if you never have the data and if it enters your system and VGS effectively starts to redirect just the sensitive fields of a payload to VGS and synthetically replace them in line, then your applications never have to speak VGS or speak tokens or anything like that, right? And so it becomes very interesting because now your applications don't need to change. It's schema preserving, and we don't use format preserving encryption. We will create synthetic data that basically mimics the underlying data itself. So there's no mathematical relation at all, right? And so that's very important to understand because that data becomes meaningless, but you can control the generation of that data yourself. So if you wanted to have machine learning properties, you can preserve that. If you wanted to be able to have the same length preserving properties, you can preserve that. The whole point is your application and the developer should not really realize that they're operating on sensitive data because you don't need to, right? Just like if I'm operating on a Flask with a glove box, that doesn't mean I'm not touching the Flask, right? Or I'm touching the viral component. I'm effectively still working on it, right? And then the other thing becomes I can then exchange it by pushing, and this is the key, by pushing my business logic to the data to operate in a secured environment instead of pulling the data out to run my operations on it. And when you inverse that, it becomes a much easier problem to solve and to secure. And you start basically controlling who has access to the data, where is it being sent, and you create all these lineage, and all of that feeds into the context by how you're using the data, and that's how we're able to secure it. Does that make sense? So there are no code changes needed, but we do inverse the way you think about the data in the first place. Instead of pulling the data out to operate on it, you push your business logic to the data instead, and that is what unlocks the value. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. So, I mean, give me a sense of this, the synthetic equivalence of the sensitive data. I mean, so if you, like using the example, like a social security number, you have like an encrypted sort of alternate version of the social security number on your own system that you sort of transliterate between the two?
Yeah, so really the value add of VGS is the whole encryption key rotation part is effectively managed by our platform for you, so you don't have to worry about that. The region storage is managed for you, so you know that the data never leaves the sovereign nation that the data originated in, so you don't have to worry about that. But by just creating an algorithm to create fake data instead, then we can generate, let's say, a fake social security number that's not a real social security number. So it could have properties like, say, hey, this social security number might be, let's say, generated from New York City. By understanding what a social security number actually entails and what these numbers mean. For example, like, if the social security number starts with like 060, you might say that's coming from a county in New York. So what we do is we say, cool, let's bring all the counties of New York City and find a county that is not the same exact county, but say a little bit further north or south or east or west of that. Take that social security number and create a different social security number that represents a unique identifier, but is not the real social security number. Does that make sense? And so by using these attributes to actually feed into the data generation, you can create synthetic lookalikes that have the feel and look of real data, but they actually are not the real data. So your application has no idea. Does that make sense?
I think so. So is that an extra level of deterrence in the sense that, like, if a hacker does get into your system and they steal all the synthetic data, is it there with the idea that if they try to hack in and they don't see any data, then they're like, this way they might think, oh, they actually got something. But if there's nothing there, then they're like, oh, it must be hosted off site, something like that.
Exactly. No, they didn't even know. They're like, I stole some data. It has some properties that might look like real data, but unless they actually send it somewhere else to verify, like
until they start using the social security numbers and seeing that none of them work. Yeah. Okay.
Correct. So start thinking about, okay, wow, that's interesting. What if when they send that data, can VGS then enforce network properties? Now you're starting to see the power. We can create canary properties of that data so that we get notified where it went, right? And so I can go tell a lawful, law enforcement agency how they can go in and trace exactly where that data originated from where, who generated it, what application. So you can start to really be able to put a timeline on how a breach happened. And that can only exist if you tap connectivity and network properties with the data that you're generating today. And the easiest example is to think about a one-time use email. Right? You can still send email to it, it will receive it, but the next time you send an email to it, it doesn't get there, right? And so the whole idea is that I can generate synthetic properties, but also network properties as well, which is why we diverged from the concept of tokenization and said this is basically, we call it aliases, because you can bind the alias to a particular application that's requesting it, or user or developer or whoever it is that's needed. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. So to that end, does that mean sort of from a cryptography sense that it's more secure because it's not being sort of randomly generated by because you're saying that like the sort of encryption of it or the artificialization of it is coming from sort of real things, like you say, moving one county up or one county down. You're using these kind of irrational but rational sort of indicators there. Does that sort of increase the complexity of the ability to sort of decrypt it?
Yeah, so there's no mathematical one-to-one relationship between them. It's effectively just two parallel operations. One, the encryption is done using best-in-class and accepted security standards, right, based on all the different requirements that are needed. But then the second part is there's a second parallel operation that happens where we synthetically generate the property of the data given your input. So you might say, I want something that does reflect a real county, but it's not the real county, or within, like let's say my age is 28, I can generate something that's 29, or let's say 25, right? And so the idea is like within some kind of acceptable range to deplete a privacy budget. And so the whole point of the generation of the data is it separates from the underlying value itself. So there's no mathematical relationship. The encryption part has been separated, but the artificial generation of that data has no underlying relationship. So there's nothing to decrypt, right?
Is it sort of like the idea, like they always say, like if you want to, make yourself like more safe against, things like whenever you fill out a new form, like do different variations of your last name or different your age. So it sort of works on that same principle then, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Except we go through, like, for example, we can even understand that, hey, if your name is Mark Johnson, replace it with like Jane Doe. And so it becomes like a gender switch too. You see like what I'm saying? So this is by being super specific.
Yeah, many more factors than just one letter change or whatever.
The dimensions that create can give you different permutations, which then generates a signature on that data itself. And that's really the property that VGS really values and thinks it's a differentiator in the way we work with data today.
So does implementing a plan like this require any sort of restructure of a company's data security department?
So that's a good point, right? So I think ultimately it doesn't require you to restructure it, but it does require you to think about why do you need the data in the first place? It requires you to think, how do I basically, instead of going decentralized, go towards, let's centralize the sensitive data itself and make it as transparent to the IT and developer environments that I have to support from a functional product support perspective, but really you don't have to restructure it, but it is supposed to give you efficiencies to start thinking about, okay, now that I don't need to worry about my data being breached, can I start training my employees or my colleagues on phishing or more interesting attacks that might have more human elements on it, right? Again, I would like to reduce the difficult parts of securing data. This is part of the vision of VGS. Let's reduce the difficult parts of securing the data and get to the meat and potatoes of how we can build a proper security culture. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. So talk more about that. What does that sort of? That was another question I had. Was what does that free up your sort of data security department to do?
Yeah. So now your security organization, which might be always understaffed or having trouble recruiting the right talent, there's always a cybersecurity shortage, right? They can focus a lot more on things like DDoS attacks, protecting against and teaching against ransomware, email security, things that potentially were bigger vectors, but have always been but have always been, hey, let's focus on data security first and protect our data from hackers. But really, but this gives them the ability to start really stepping back and understanding what threats they need to think about from a security organization. Again, not the data security piece, but more about what's the cybersecurity posture of the company. Do my vendors have the same level of cybersecurity? When I exchange my data, how can I create lineage? These are all things that are super critical that the organization needs to step back and think about, not just how do I, redeploy some HSMs or how do I, make some new encryption. And so that's the real value that we give our customers here, is giving them the ability to think more about how do I strategically position the environment to become more of a business driver rather than, traditionally a cost center, right?
So how does this data security plan fit with things like privacy issues around GDPR and CCPA or, New York Shield or whatever? Does this work within those sort of compliance requirements? Does it change things? Does it change the way you have to sort of make yourself compliant when you're not sort of securing data on site like that? Or is that still a whole other set of rules?
No. So the idea here is obviously, these important laws are, if you take it again, since I'm coming from a payments background, I see the similarities in the way we're starting to govern data today in the same way that the financial infrastructure regulators govern the movement of money today, right? And so think about how the Treasury Department manages the money movements from state to state. For example, if you don't know, you have to get, to view a money service business, you have to get 48 different licenses from 50 states. 48, that means, so that's basically the same thing as saying the CCPA or the New York Shield Act, or GDPR has enforcement from different federal governments. And so every country and every state is going to pass equivalent laws. And so one of the greatest things about being a portfolio company from Andreessen Horowitz is Mark Andreessen's Software is Eating the World was a classic essay that, talks about the software, movement and the revolution that we're going in. But as we have the world changing, software has to change as well, right? And so when we think about data security plans, it's not just about privacy issues, but it's about how the applications are handling that data so that they can satisfy and speak the protocols that are needed to satisfy these compliances, right? So if I collect your social security number again, then I need to be able to also track it, understand it, tie it to your identity, and then also be able to remove it on your request from all of my systems, right? I need to be able to tell you exactly how I used it because that is now your right. To do that, I have to change the way my software is built, but or you can use something like VGS, which drops it in, and it starts to track the data's movement because it's in the ingress and the egress operations. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, it does. And again, I guess there's aspects of the, compliance regulations around, right to be forgotten and stuff, which doesn't sort of fall under this purview. There's the privacy of, making sure it's secure on site, but there's also, other things that the company's still going to have to deal with in terms of like when they decide to delete the, the information or how they decide to use it or things like that. So it's two different things.
Correct.
So based on your experience in the field and your view of that field in 5 years or more, what are some things that people who want to become data security professionals now should start learning to prepare themselves for the accelerating change of the future, especially if your plan goes underway? What does the position look like in 5 years, do you think?
So I think we need to start thinking about how data security can be used as a differentiator to instill trust as a business that our consumers will do, so consumers can trust us as institutions that are trustworthy, right? I think ultimately the whole point of data security is not only to secure the data itself, but ultimately is to exude trust for consumers to do more business with us, right? And I fundamentally believe it is a competitive differentiator when you do take security seriously, not just lip service, but when you say, I do take it seriously, and it's one of those things where we will protect it because we value our relationship to you, with you, customer, right? And so to me, that's the value add. So in 5 years, we need to think about where data security professionals who are starting today, they need to think about how they can always drive business value, not just argue about, what is the most and latest encryption that might work, right? I think we need to talk about more about how can we instill agility into our business while maintaining the credibility that is expected of us from customers. And that requires you now to marry technical understanding, but also how new applications will be developed so that we can transform digitally. And COVID's accelerating this. COVID's accelerating the ability for us to be able to say we no longer can have a security guard because that security guard is sheltering in place. You understand? And so the idea becomes, okay, how do I do a remote workforce? Like, is the VPN still the way that protect my network? What does zero trust look like? And all of these different things are going to become very critical in the future where we are going to be using them. And so I think if I were to advise someone getting into that field, is definitely read up on where the world's going, where we don't have the idea of a physical location anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So to that end, what types of, apart from reading stuff, what types of skills or experiences or training or certs do you think potential data security professionals should be trying to highlight on their resumes? Or, as you said, like what types of learning? Because it sounds like you're really sort of emphasizing some fairly abstract learning in the sense of like, speculative and, in the way that the industry is going to go. What do you recommend in that regard?
I think every type of data security professional needs to put themselves in the shoes of an attacker. And so I think if I were starting today, I think I'm able to articulate a lot of these things a lot better because I've been there on the other side to see how I would be able to potentially approach something from that regards, right? And so do we really trust a pen test, right? Do we really trust a vulnerability scan? What does 0 day look like? How do I tell the signals of being, indicators of compromise, right? What does that mean? And so I think being able to put ourselves and go through different, capture the flag exercises or being able to, even get involved with reverse engineering. I think being able to just have a very shallow, not deep, but just shallow experience where we can able to speak about these things at a high level allows us to really start tying in better understanding of how we can holistically approach a data security, become a data security professional. I don't think any type of certification is going to solve this problem in the future. I think it's going to be more about what can we do to emulate the attacker, and what can we do to put ourselves in the mindset of, if an attacker can do this, how do I prevent it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So to that end, another thing we like to really hammer away on here is for, advice for people who might be working in some aspect of cybersecurity, but are trying to make a lateral move into some sort of aspect of data security, whether they're working at a help desk now, or whether they're, reading log files, or pen testing, or doing some other thing. Like, what are some skill sets? It sounds like you've already kind of given some for amateurs, and they probably apply here too. But what are some things you recommend for people who are already in the industry but are looking to sort of move in this direction?
Yeah, the best look. I'm always available, and the Infosec community can sometimes seem very jarring because not everybody thinks like, there's potentially some kind of it seems like it's a little standoffish, but it's not. Most people actually do want to mentor and help, right? So asking folks and doing that is very, very important. But I think ultimately, as folks are into the space, it's just really all about attitude, right? It's all about attitude, and it's really about not giving up. And so the point of, as you go into the space, being able to just get in and share some of these insights, go do a bug bounty, go help, do a security audit, and just, hop on IRC or any of these Slack rooms and kind of talk through that. I think you'll be able to start to realize and get a taste of what a day-to-day looks like. And then that is a great example to translate your skill sets into a professional career in data security.
Okay. So as we wrap up today, you've told us a fair amount about very good security in your platform, your model and stuff, but could you tell me some projects or products that the company's working on right now that are exciting to you?
Absolutely. So one of the things we're trying to understand is twofold. One is it possible, when you separate the data from the transaction provider, to be able to add best execution on the value that you're actually trying to generate with the data itself? So a very high level example, if I am running a credit score on you, is it possible that VGS, because we've seen people connect to many different credit providers on our platform, is it possible to have those credit providers give you best cost execution so that you can route to the best credit card provider for you, the best credit score provider for you, that will give you the most information at the lowest cost? And so by separating the data from the transaction provider, it really starts to open up a significant portion of how to embed value very quickly. And we think that's a massive revenue driver for companies that want to separate, again, the data from the transaction provider first, right? Again, more value, less focused on what parts of the data are secured, right? And so how it's used, that allows us to really focus on driving further value into our organizational, into the customers that we use today. Is that helpful? Is that helpful to think about, kind of like a cool idea?
Works for me. Yeah. So last question, if people want to know more about Mahmoud Abdelkader or VGS, where can they go and find you online?
They can always go to my website, mahmoudamus.com. I actually got that name from after watching Gladiator, and it's Maximus. I was like, oh, that's my new name, Mahmoudamus.
I love it. Okay. Mahmoudamus.com.
If you go to mahmoudamus.com, just put IMUS at the end of Mahmoud, and then click on Twitter and just shoot me an email, or give me a tweet, or even just, you can find us at verygoodsecurity.com. I rotate on support. So when the intercom thing comes up, I might be the one that responds to you.
Oh, that's awesome, man. You're keeping it street level.
Yeah, absolutely. Have to see how people ask, right? Got
to know what the questions are before you can answer.
Right. That's
nice.
Right.
All right, Mahmoud, thank you for joining us today on Cyberwork. This was really fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so super glad to be here.
My pleasure. And thank you as ever for all of you for listening and watching. If you enjoyed today's video, you can find many more of them on our YouTube page. Just go to youtube.com and type in Cyberwork with Infosec to check out our collection of tutorials, interviews, and past webinars. If you'd rather have us in your ears during your workday, all of our videos are also available as audio podcasts. Just search Cyberwork with Infosec in your podcast catcher of choice. And thank you, all of you who have been rating and reviewing. It really does help out if you haven't yet. Whatever platform you're on, whether it's Stitcher or iTunes or Spotify, we would love a 5-star and a review if you think we're worthy of it. As a reminder, to download our free Wild Wild Net security awareness campaign, including posters, infographics, newsletters, email templates, presentations, and more to keep your employees safe, go to infosecinstitute.com/NCSAM2020. That's infosecinstitute.com/NCSAM2020 to go get it all. Thank you once again to Mahmoud Abdelkader, and thank you all again for watching and listening. We will speak to you next week.